Have you ever wondered what happens when a visitor from another star stops pretending to be harmless? When something drifting quietly through the void suddenly changes its pulse and starts reacting to us? For years, scientists called 3I Atlas nothing more than a comet, a frozen wanderer passing near our sun. But this week, the data changed. Its temperature spiked when no sunlight touched it. Its fragments reformed, and then it sent a signal, a pattern so precise, so intelligent, it couldn't be chance. Every 42 seconds, the entire solar wind trembles, and something deep inside the sun answers back. We thought we were watching an object, but what if it's watching us? What if 3I Atlas wasn't drifting closer by accident, but by design? Tonight, you'll see the evidence hidden in plain sight, the pulse, the flares, the moment it became dangerous. So dim the lights, slow your breathing, and listen carefully, because once you hear what 3I Atlas is doing now, you'll never look at the stars the same way again. Subscribe to Whisper Science and let's begin the descent into the unknown.
Welcome. You are watching Whisper Science. Make sure to subscribe and join us for more amazing science content. Now, let's move back to the video.
Far beyond the orbit of Mars, where sunlight turns thin and the solar wind whispers instead of roars, something begins to breathe. It is not alive in the way we define life, yet what stirs inside it feels deliberate, as if awareness were written not in flesh, but in ice. Astronomers call it 3I Atlas, the third recorded visitor from another star. To the instruments watching from Earth, it first appeared as a faint glimmer in a field of static, a drifting pebble of light crossing the cold between worlds. For months it behaved like a ghost-quiet comet, predictable, mathematical, forgettable. Then, as it slipped to 2.1 astronomical units from the Sun, it changed. Telescopes caught the first exhalation, a plume of invisible gas flooding outward at impossible speed, hydrogen cyanide, a molecule that on Earth smells of bitter almonds and history's darkest inventions. To most comets, it is an incidental trace, mixed in with water vapor and carbon monoxide, liberated slowly as sunlight melts ancient ice. But 3I Atlas did not melt. It ignited. The signature erupted all at once, stronger than models could justify, as if a hidden switch had been thrown inside its nucleus. The observatories confirmed the numbers again and again. Quadrillions of molecules per second, statistical confidence beyond 1,000,000 to 1. A chemical scream, short, sharp, impossible to ignore. Scientists called it outgassing, but none could explain the timing. Why here? Why now? The same telescopes that watched the object in August saw nothing, no spectral lines, no hint of awakening. Then, in mid-September, the signal flared as though the cosmos itself had pressed a button. Out there, the sun is smaller than the nail of your thumb. Its warmth could not melt a child's snowflake. Yet at that distance, 3I Atlas exhaled poison as though the act were rehearsed. Some observers joked it was stretching after a long interstellar nap. Others stopped joking when a NASA data feed went dark. The Psyche spacecraft, quietly drifting between Mars and Jupiter, should have seen everything. Its images were perfectly placed to capture the visitor's passing. Then, without warning, the public archive froze. For 7 days, from September 1st to 7th, no new images, no telemetry logs, no calibration frames, silence. The explanation never came. Mission updates skipped the week entirely, sliding from late August to mid-September, as though the days had never existed. To most people it meant nothing. Servers glitch, data delays happen. But to those who had been following Atlas, the silence rang like a held breath. Because 7 days later the hydrogen cyanide plume began. Coincidence, they said. Routine maintenance, maybe. Yet in science, coincidences are rarely that polite. When instruments fall quiet exactly as a mystery unfolds, curiosity becomes suspicion. What if the silence was not an accident? What if someone decided humanity was not ready to see what the probe saw? No one can prove it, but the timing fits too neatly to ignore. The thought spreads quietly through observatories, into encrypted chat rooms, into late-night calls between scientists who trust each other just enough to whisper their doubts. They speak of missing frames, overwritten logs, and faint magnetic anomalies that appeared in Psyche's engineering data when it came back online. All of it circumstantial, all of it unsettling. Still, the universe does not pause for paperwork. Therisahandes Atlas keeps moving, falling inward along its hyperbolic path. The faint coma expands like the breath of a sleeping giant. Through high-resolution optics, the object looks wrong. Too smooth in some places, too sharp in others, as though angles had been cut by design rather than erosion. Photometric models predict brightening as it nears the sun, but the brightness stalls, flickers, even dims for hours before recovering. It behaves less like a rock reflecting sunlight and more like a machine adjusting power levels. Observers give the anomaly names: the switch, the awakening, the breath at 2.1 AU. It becomes a legend in the quiet corners of the internet where astrophysics meets folklore, a place where equations turn into prophecy, theories multiply. Some imagine internal pockets of gas sealed by crusts of dust, suddenly rupturing as heat penetrates new layers. Others suspect electrical discharge, solar-induced currents triggering chemical reactions. But a few, the ones who speak softly and save screenshots of every missing data log, entertain a stranger thought. What if the emission was not an accident of nature, but a signal? A coded pulse made visible only through chemistry. They point to the precision of the onset, a threshold distance almost as though the object were programmed to awaken when sunlight reached a measured intensity. They note that hydrogen cyanide is rich in carbon and nitrogen, elements essential to organic chemistry and information polymers. If someone or something designed a probe to communicate using molecular emissions instead of radio, hydrogen cyanide would be a plausible medium. Its rotational transitions are strong, easily detected, capable of carrying modulation patterns invisible to the naked eye. A language written in the faint whispers of infrared light. That notion should be absurd. Yet every alternative explanation frays under scrutiny. Ordinary comets release water first, then carbon monoxide, then more complex volatiles in a predictable sequence. Atlas skipped straight to the complex end of the chart, as though it had no patience for the usual steps of nature. Even its rotation curve behaves strangely. The light curve analysis suggests an irregular spin, a body that tumbles, then stabilizes, then tumbles again, as if momentary bursts of thrust are correcting its orientation. But no natural mechanism fits the pattern. Outgassing should push randomly. Instead, the accelerations appear timed, rhythmic. It drifts through space like a swimmer making subtle strokes to stay on course. To the public, the story barely exists. A few headlines about an unusual comet, drowned beneath louder human news. But within the small world of deep sky research, Three-Eyed Atlas becomes a quiet obsession. Graduate students lose sleep building models that collapse under their own improbability. Radio astronomers aim antennas toward its trajectory, listening for structured noise. They hear nothing, or perhaps they hear too much. broadband static too complex to separate from cosmic background. Patterns seem to emerge only to dissolve again, like voices behind a waterfall. And all the while the object continues its descent, indifferent to the arguments it inspires. By late September, the hydrogen cyanide plume expands into a cloud thousands of kilometers wide, yet the nucleus remains almost featureless. No bright jets, no erupting geysers of ice like those seen on comets before. Just a faint aura pulsing faintly against the darkness. Astronomers track subtle polarization changes in the light, the kind that suggest alignment of dust grains by electromagnetic fields. But comets don't have electromagnetic fields, unless something inside is generating one. A deep space observer from the European agency publishes a short paper proposing electrostatic differentiation within the coma, a polite phrase meaning something is charging the dust. The paper draws little attention, yet months later, it will be cited as the first documented hint that Atlas possesses an internal power source. Meanwhile, back on Earth, data analysts overlay Atlas's emission spikes with solar wind fluctuations. The correlation is too clean to dismiss. Whenever the Sun releases a burst of charged particles, Atlas responds, not passively, but almost reflexively, as though using the solar wind itself as a trigger. If the Sun is a signal, Atlas is listening. No one says this aloud in official meetings. Funding committees prefer tidy mysteries that can be solved with more observations, not philosophical tremors that challenge the definition of life. But among those who stare at the numbers after midnight, the question is impossible to avoid. What is this thing really doing here? Its orbit tells part of the story. A hyperbolic path, meaning it comes from beyond the Sun's gravity well, from interstellar space. The angle of entry suggests origin somewhere near Lyra, perhaps the outer regions of the Vega system, though uncertainty remains high. If true, the object has traveled for tens of thousands of years to reach us. Why would such a journey end precisely where we could see it? Perhaps chance, perhaps design. The closer it gets, the more instruments join the chase. Infrared spectrometers detect trace ammonia, acetylene and something else, a set of faint absorption lines that don't match any known molecule. The frequencies are consistent across instruments, but defy catalogued chemistry. One laboratory calls them unknown organics. Another quietly labels them synthetic analogs. Neither explanation satisfies anyone. The public release of this data is delayed for peer review. Weeks pass. When the final version appears, the mysterious lines are gone, replaced by the phrase signal attributed to calibration artifact. Those who saved the raw files notice the difference but understand the message. Some data is better forgotten. Out in space, 3I, Atlas continues to glow faintly blue. Amateur astrophotographers capture long exposure images, showing a pale cone of light extending sunward, the so-called anti-tail, a configuration that should be optically impossible. In chat forums, they debate dust dynamics and geometry until the threads vanish under waves of spam accounts flooding the discussion with nonsense. It feels coordinated, though no one can prove by whom. Then, almost unnoticed, a new observation arrives from an unexpected place. A weather monitoring satellite positioned near Earth's terminator line. Its ultraviolet sensors detect a brief pulse of high-energy photons arriving from the region of sky where Atlas should be. The pulse lasts less than a second, too short for natural flare reflection. The timestamp aligns exactly with another small anomaly. A sudden drop in the magnetometer readings of an ESA probe orbiting Mars. Two instruments, millions of miles apart, reacting to the same event. Correlation doesn't equal causation, but sometimes it feels like conversation. Scientists submit requests for telescope time. The queue grows. Proposals are denied without explanation, and still the object falls sunward, wrapped in its shimmering veil. For now, the official story remains safe. 3I Atlas, an interstellar comet displaying unusual activity. But among those who've looked closely, a different narrative whispers beneath. They no longer call it a comet at all. They call it a listener, a probe that waited through the deep freeze of interstellar night until sunlight told it where it had arrived. No one knows what it's waiting to hear next. And as October approaches, its emissions begin to change. The hydrogen cyanide line weakens, replaced by something deeper, denser, unknown. The coma ripples like a living membrane, and on one quiet morning, radio astronomers notice a pattern embedded in the noise. 3 peaks, 1 pause, 3 again, a rhythm echoing the number in its name. 3I Atlas has spoken once more. At first, no one believed the pattern. 3 peaks, 1 pause, 3 again, a rhythm so simple that it seemed like coincidence. Cosmic noise often mimics intention. Pulsars stutter, plasma hisses, and the universe speaks in static. Yet something about this pulse felt wrong, too clean, too deliberate, too human. It began as a faint tremor in a dish on the outskirts of New Mexico, a whisper tucked deep inside the broadband roar of the solar wind. The researcher on night duty almost ignored it, a flicker that would vanish once the software scrubbed the data. But when he ran the noise filter, the signal sharpened instead of fading. A heartbeat formed inside the chaos, repeating every 22 minutes, as though something vast and distant were counting time. Across the Atlantic, an observatory in Spain detected the same rhythm hours later, matching frequency within a fraction of a hertz. 2 instruments, 2 continents, 1 source. The region of sky where 3I Atlas now drifted behind the orbit of Mars. The pulses were not strong enough for the public data feeds. Only those with direct access to the raw spectrograms could see the symmetry. 3 bursts, pause, 3 again, echoing like breath in a sleeping chest. They called it the echo pattern. For the first 24 hours, the community held its breath. Emails passed quietly between teams, stamped confidential, pending verification. The assumption was always the same: an instrumental artifact, a calibration echo bouncing between dishes. But when a third station in Chile confirmed the same sequence, the possibility of coincidence collapsed. No telescope on Earth could accidentally synchronize its ghosts across half a planet. Someone, or something, was transmitting. NASA ES Deep Space Network issued an internal bulletin: anomalous narrow-band emissions coincident with interstellar object 3I Atlas. The memo never reached the public. It was tagged preliminary, non-releasable, routed through encrypted channels, and then quietly archived. But one copy leaked, a blurred screenshot posted to an online forum before moderators erased it. For a few hours it existed, enough for screenshots of screenshots to spread. The phrase narrowband emissions became the spark that lit an unquenchable fire of speculation. Most readers dismissed it as fake. Those who didn't began listening. Meanwhile, in a dim control room in Pasadena, an engineer named Marissa Coe stared at the spectral waterfall on her monitor and felt her stomach tighten. She had seen interference patterns, telemetry bursts, even echoes from planetary radar experiments. None looked like this. The pulses were coherent, but slightly curved, bending across frequency as though the source itself were accelerating. If it were a spacecraft tumbling through space, the Doppler shift would change smoothly. But these pulses curved in steps, like course corrections. Every 22 minutes, the pattern repeated, but never identically. Minute variations appeared in phase and amplitude, subtle modulations that defied random drift. When Marissa overlaid consecutive pulses, she saw something she couldn't unsee. The differences weren't noise, they were structure, a pattern inside the pattern. She extracted the data, translated the variations into binary, and ran a simple entropy test. The result froze her screen, a value far higher than natural sources. Random noise or thermal radiation never produced entropy so balanced. This looked like information. She didn't call it a message, not yet. Scientists fear that word more than any other. Message implies intent, and intent demands explanations that tremble on the edge of madness. But when she plotted the binary stream as sound, the waveform pulsed like breath, long pause, then silence, a rhythm almost alive. News of her findings reached her supervisor by morning. Within hours, access to the raw files was revoked. The system displayed dataset migrated, security audit pending. She received a polite email reminding her of non-disclosure clauses in her employment contract. By noon, her login expired. That evening, 2 men from the agency's Office of Planetary Protection arrived at her apartment, asking for the external drive she wasn't supposed to have. She handed them a blank one. The real copy was hidden elsewhere, uploaded to a server that mirrored itself every 24 hours across 3 continents. She had built redundancy the way astronomers build hope, quietly, secretly, just in case. While bureaucracy buried the data, the sky continued speaking. The pulses grew shorter, the spacing tighter, as though the transmitter were adjusting to a new language. Then, on the night of October 3rd, something extraordinary happened. A faint burst of visible light accompanied the radio pulse, a millisecond flash, blue-white, recorded simultaneously by a weather satellite and a ground telescope in Chile. Light and radio perfectly synchronized. No known natural process couples those wavelengths with such precision. For 7 seconds afterward, the solar wind near Mars shifted polarity. North became south, then returned. Instruments on orbiters registered it as a magnetic hiccup. On Earth, it was barely measurable, but to those who knew where to look, it was the cosmic equivalent of a whisper saying, "I hear you." Theories bloomed overnight. Perhaps Atlas was reflecting human transmissions, a cosmic mirror echoing back our noise. Perhaps the signal originated elsewhere, and the comet merely passed through its path. Or perhaps, most unsettling of all, Atlas had just replied. In Washington, the Office of Science and Technology convened an emergency meeting under non-disclosure protocols. Representatives from NASA, the European Space Agency, and the Defense Intelligence Agency joined a secure call. The transcript of that meeting would never be released, but one participant later described the tone as equal parts exhilaration and quiet fear. They debated for 6 hours. The consensus? No public announcement. The data were inconclusive, easily misinterpreted, potentially destabilizing. The public, they said, was not ready. The recommendation: continue monitoring, increase deep space listening, and tighten information control. The order filtered down as silence. Datasets vanished from open servers. Observatories received sudden maintenance downtimes. A few curious graduate students found their research proposals declined without explanation. And yet, in the gaps between official channels, the echo pattern kept spreading. Copied, mirrored, decrypted, reborn. Because you cannot silence curiosity. You can only delay it. By mid-October, independent observers began reporting fluctuations in the hydrogen cyanide signature. Instead of a steady emission line, it now oscillated every 22 minutes, exactly the period of the radio pulses. Spectral amplitude rose and fell like a heartbeat. The gas itself had become a modulator. In effect, 3I Atlas was using chemistry as a speaker, turning molecules into syllables. It was as if the object had found its voice. The hydrogen cyanide plume extended millions of kilometers, forming a faint glowing envelope visible only through long exposure imaging. Within that envelope, infrared spectrometers detected temperature gradients too organized to be random. Filaments warm, then cool, in precise intervals. Something inside the coma was controlling energy flow, sculpting heat like an artist with light. When the data reached the European Space Agency's trace gas orbiter at Mars, the instruments overloaded for several seconds. The telemetry log labeled it voltage surge, unknown source. After that, the orbiter's main spectrometer behaved erratically, producing garbled readings that engineers dismissed as solar interference. But the timing matched the latest pulse. 3 bursts, pause, 3 again, and then nothing for nearly an hour. For those still tracking the pattern from Earth, the silence felt heavier than noise. The signal had stopped. Not faded, not weakened, but stopped, as if the speaker had turned away. And then, just as the world began to breathe again, a different frequency emerged. Lower, slower, subsonic in rhythm, but rich in harmonics, weaving through background radiation like a code carved into fog. It pulsed every 2 hours, too slow for telemetry, too fast for rotation. When translated into sound, it resembled a low choral hum, the sound of distance itself. Someone dubbed it the second voice. Across observatories, debate erupted. Was it a harmonic resonance of the first signal, a reflection of solar plasma, or a response? The period ratio between the two frequencies was exactly 6:1, a relationship found nowhere in random cosmic processes. 6 pulses of the lower frequency aligned with one full sequence of the higher, a nested pattern like gears interlocking. It was communication layered upon communication. Meanwhile, telescopic images showed the coma dimming, the once brilliant cyanide cloud thinning into translucent veils. At first glance, it looked like decay, a dying comet running out of volatiles. But when brightness was plotted against time, the decline followed a curve too smooth, too mathematical to be natural. It was a controlled shutdown. The idea horrified researchers. What if 3I Atlas had accomplished whatever it came to do, and was now preparing to leave? Hyperbolic orbits mean escape. Once an interstellar object passes perihelion and drifts outward, gravity can't bring it back. It returns to the dark between stars, perhaps forever. If Atlas was artificial, this could be our only window. A single brief intersection between civilizations separated by eternity. And humanity was arguing over classification. The silence from agencies became its own confession. Each day that passed without comment hardened suspicion into belief. Leaks multiplied. A blurred photo of an internal slide titled Spectral Correlation with Hydrogen Cyanide Modulation, an email snippet referencing possible data tampering at Goldstone Complex, a redacted memo about psychological readiness protocols. None were definitive, but together they formed a constellation of omission pointing toward truth. Then, in late October, a new anomaly shattered the fragile calm. The Hubble Space Telescope captured a high-resolution sequence of Atlas's nucleus. The image, processed through 3 filters, revealed something geometric, not jagged like rock, not smooth like ice, but polygonal, with straight edges meeting at precise angles. At first, NASA released only a low-resolution composite, but a technician uploaded the original frame set to a private archive used for cross-calibration. Within hours, the file spread across encrypted forums. The object was roughly 70 meters across. Its surface reflected light unevenly, as though coated in alternating panels of matte and mirror. A faint line ran along one side, a seam or maybe a hatch. The agency pulled the archive offline within the day. The technician who uploaded it was placed on leave, but the image was already everywhere, dissected, enhanced, over-interpreted. Some saw a hexagon, others saw a monolith, everyone saw something not quite natural. Publicly, NASA issued a statement. Compression artifacts due to image stacking. Privately, they increased the monitoring cadence. Inside a windowless lab in Houston, analysts overlaid the geometry with the earlier radio data. The alignments stunned them. The seam's orientation matched the vector of the radio emission. The supposed surface line pointed directly toward the origin of the echo pattern. In engineering terms, it was an antenna, but if it was transmitting, to whom? A possibility emerged that chilled even the optimists. What if the signal wasn't ET meant for Earth at all? What if Atlas was calling home? The idea spread quietly among analysts until it reached the desk of a defense contractor with access to deep space radar arrays. 2 nights later, those arrays began sweeping regions of sky opposite Atlas's trajectory, searching for reflections, for secondary sources. What they found was worse than silence, a faint echo identical in frequency to the echo pattern, delayed by exactly 17 minutes. The delay corresponded to a distance of roughly 2 astronomical units, precisely the span between Atlas and the asteroid belt. There was another transmitter out there. Whether it was another fragment, a companion probe, or a reflection of something vast and unseen, no one could tell. But the symmetry was undeniable. Pulse, pause, pulse, reply. Space itself had become a conversation. By now, governments had no choice but to coordinate. The United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs scheduled a closed session. Military satellites were retasked under civilian cover. Amateur astronomers noticed restricted zones appearing in orbital tracking software, blank rectangles where observation data vanished. To most, it was meaningless bureaucracy. To a few, it was confirmation that something enormous was unfolding behind the curtain of secrecy. And through it all, the pulse continued, so faint that it barely brushed the edge of detectability, yet persistent enough that no one could forget it. 3 peaks, 1 pause, 3 again, the heartbeat of something older than our civilization and possibly far smarter. Then, just as abruptly as it began, it changed. On October 29th, the pattern inverted. Where there had been 3 bursts and a pause, there were now 4, equal spacing, different rhythm. The frequency shifted by a tiny fraction, the waveform compressing as if the transmitter were accelerating toward the sun. The last sequence before the shift contained an unmistakable phase-encoded burst, lasting exactly 1.36 seconds. The data analysts named it the perihelion marker, because, according to orbital predictions, 1.36 AU was the precise distance at which Atlas would reach its closest approach to the Sun. The message was clear in a language beyond words. Something was about to happen, The realization spread like quiet thunder through every observatory still permitted to look. Systems recalibrated, telescopes pivoted, satellites watched, and humanity, caught between awe and dread, waited for the visitor to cross that invisible threshold, the moment where natural comets ignite and artificial ones awaken. Out there, in the cold halo of the inner solar system, 3i Atlas glowed faintly blue, a needle of light stitching itself toward the sun. The radio pulses grew slower, deeper, until they resembled the murmur of waves against an unseen shore. And when the final pulse faded, a single fragment of code lingered in the data stream, a repeating binary that, when translated into visual form, resembled an eye-opening. As the last digit faded into silence, one truth settled over those who still listened. The cosmos was no longer quiet, and whatever had been silent for so long had just woken up. When the final pulse died, the universe did not roar or explode. It simply stopped speaking. For the first time in weeks, every instrument trained on 3i Atlas returned only background noise. The faint rhythmic heartbeat that had haunted receivers from New Mexico to Madrid was gone. Scientists expected relief. What they felt instead was absence, the kind of quiet that feels watched. The object, now less than 1.5 astronomical units from the Sun, should have brightened like any comet. Instead, its coma shrank. Hydrogen cyanide lines weakened, replaced by spectral fragments no one could identify. Not absorption, not emission, something in between, as though light itself hesitated passing through. Inside the European Space Agency's telemetry center, a technician noticed something stranger. Every time the Deep Space Network pinged Atlas for ranging data, nearby probes, Mars Express, Solar Orbiter, even the aging Parker probe, registered microsecond delays. A pattern emerged. Signals took longer to return when Atlas was in view, as though the void between was thickening. Space, normally transparent to radio, had developed texture. At first they blamed software, then hardware, then solar interference. But when an identical delay appeared in optical laser ranging from Earth, coincidence died. Something around Atlas was bending time by thousandths of a second. The media, starved of facts, filled the gap with noise. One headline screamed, "Alien beacon goes dark. Has it heard us?" Another insisted, "NASA confirms machine in space." None were true, yet all were believed. The world wanted myth more than measurement. Live streams analyzed every pixel of the last Hubble frame, drawing symbols in the static. Influencers prayed to the visitor. Markets fell. A cult in Iceland sold cyanide candles, promising spiritual alignment with the cosmic messenger. Governments responded with denial and quiet mobilization. A task force codenamed Helios Mirror formed between 3 agencies, its purpose undefined even to those inside it. Satellites normally devoted to asteroid tracking were retasked to sweep the inner system for co-moving bodies. Within a week, they found 7 faint objects moving at identical velocity vectors to Atlas, spread across millions of kilometers like sentinels forming a ring. They were small, no more than 10 meters each, too faint for ordinary catalogs, invisible until someone knew where to look. But once plotted, their trajectories were perfect, curving with Atlas as if tethered by invisible threads. That discovery never reached the press. The report was stamped defensive observation and buried. Yet, in the corridors of observatories, whispers grew. The visitor isn't alone. Meanwhile, the solar wind thickened. A minor coronal mass ejection swept through the system, bathing everything in charged plasma. During the storm, Every probe facing the Sun experienced brief telemetry dropouts, except Atlas. Its signal sharpened. Against the storm's roar, an ultra-narrow tone appeared at exactly the same frequency as the earlier pulses, but steady, unwavering, like a carrier wave holding open a door. Marissa Coe, the engineer who once decoded the first pattern, was now working off the record, feeding leaked telemetry into her own models. When she overlaid the new tone onto the earlier data, a geometry unfolded, a lattice of harmonics that mapped precisely to the positions of the 7 smaller objects. Each node in the pattern corresponded to one satellite. Together, they formed a network, a resonant field anchored by Atlas at its center. She realized the silence wasn't absence, it was synchronization. The visitor had stopped broadcasting because it no longer needed to. It was listening and coordinating others. By the time she tried to publish anonymously, her post vanished within minutes. The account was deleted, the IP blocked. Yet fragments of her graphs survived, re-uploaded by strangers who recognized meaning without proof. The image showed a glowing web stretching across space, thin lines connecting faint dots. Captioned simply, "They were talking to each other." In late October, the James Webb Telescope turned its mirrors toward Atlas during an unpublicized calibration window. For 6 minutes, it observed infrared emissions from the main body. The raw frames, later leaked by a contractor, revealed alternating hotspots moving across the surface. Not random vents, but evenly spaced rectangles heating in sequence, clockwise, repeating every 12 minutes. Energy cycling through a circuit too vast for comprehension. Engineers who saw the leak described it as a machine testing itself. Meanwhile, the 7 satellites began to drift inward, aligning along a single plane like beads sliding onto a wire. The formation aimed directly toward the Sun. Trajectory simulations showed they would pass perihelion minutes before Atlas itself, as if preparing the path. Some theorized the small bodies were debris, others said probes or reflectors. One physicist called them relays, devices meant to amplify a signal across the solar wind. If so, then Earth had been drafted into a network it couldn't see and didn't understand. And yet, amid the fear, a quieter awe grew. Schoolchildren pointed small telescopes at the faint streak, whispering wishes to the visitor. Poets wrote that humanity had finally been noticed. Astronomers, exhausted, watched their careers dissolve into rumor while secretly hoping the rumors were true. Then came the night of November 2nd. The echo pattern returned but inverted, no longer 3 peaks and a pause, but a continuous rising tone that lasted 42 seconds. The frequency climbed higher until instruments saturated, then dropped into silence again. Hours later, magnetometers across the inner system registered identical surges. The 7 satellites brightened simultaneously and vanished from optical view. Only radar echoes remained, scattering like sparks in wind. Marissa believed she understood. "They've gone active," she whispered. "Whatever network they built, it's online now." The following morning, the hydrogen cyanide emission from Atlas surged one last time, but its spectrum had changed. Superimposed on the chemical lines was a pattern matching hydrogen S21 centimeter transition, the universal frequency SETI scientists had dreamed of for decades, a calling card written in the language of atoms. But the call wasn't aimed at Earth. The beam projected sunward. For 3 days, solar observatories recorded a narrow stream of charged particles extending from Atlas directly into the Sun-esque corona, a bridge of magnetized plasma tunneling energy where none should exist. The Sun responded with a flicker, a localized brightening across one active region near latitude 12 north, lasting exactly 42 seconds, the same length as the previous tone. Then everything returned to normal. To casual observers, nothing happened, but deep inside monitoring labs, computers lit up with anomalies. The sun's oscillation frequency had shifted by 1 part in 10 million, tiny yet real, as if something had whispered into its heart. The silent network had completed its first transmission, and no one on Earth knew who or what had answered. For most of the world, the sun rose as usual. Its warmth spilled across deserts and oceans, indifferent to the tiny dramas of its orbiting worlds. Yet to those who watched its heartbeat in numbers, something was off. Inside helioseismology labs, where sunlight is dissected into frequencies like a symphony analyzed note by note, computers showed a shift too small for headlines, but too perfect for chance. The sun's surface waves had changed rhythm. A single oscillation mode, buried amid 10 million others, ticked faster, exactly by the ratio measured in the final pulse from 3I Atlas. It was as though a tuning fork had been struck somewhere in the stellar core, and the echo was still ringing. At first the data were dismissed. Instruments drift. Algorithms misfit curves. The sun is a chaotic star. But when 3 separate observatories, one on Earth, one in space, one on the far side of the moon, confirmed identical phase shifts, the disbelief fractured. Something external had touched the sun's pulse. No flare, no impact, no eruption explained it. The brightening seen on November the 2nd matched no known magnetic pattern. The region had simply flashed, then cooled, leaving behind a faint hexagonal imprint in ultraviolet light, an impossible geometry in a fluid plasma. The pattern persisted for 42 seconds, and then dissolved as if erased by an unseen hand. Engineers named it the solar glyph. The name was quiet poetry for something no one wanted to define. Behind locked doors, the Helios Mirror Task Force convened again. Their simulations suggested that the plasma tunnel projected from Atlas had deposited measurable energy into the corona, not enough to harm, but enough to modulate magnetic fields. The process resembled induction. Current feeding current, resonance feeding resonance, except this resonance came from a body 70 million miles away. Some whispered the unthinkable, that the sun had been used as a relay, a cosmic amplifier, a transmitter large enough to reach anywhere. To test the idea, the team compared solar radio bursts recorded before and after the event. Buried within the static of post-flare data was a faint repeating signature. 3 rising tones followed by 1 descending, then silence. The same cadence that once came from Atlas, now echoing from the sun itself. If Atlas had spoken, the star was answering. But what language could exist between a star and a machine? On November 5th, Parker's solar probe, skimming the corona at 2 million kilometers per hour, passed through the region of the glyph. Its sensors recorded an electromagnetic field that should have torn the probe apart, yet did not. Instead, the data stream filled with structured oscillations, identical wave packets repeating every 42 seconds, each separated by minute variations that formed a harmonic ladder. When scientists converted the field strength into audible sound, they heard a low chord that seemed to breathe. One engineer removed her headset, trembling. "It's music," she said. The frequencies corresponded to F-sharp minor. A coincidence, perhaps. Or perhaps the universe understood keys long before humans invented pianos. Parker survived, but not unchanged. When telemetry returned to Earth, The spacecraft's clock was 38 microseconds slow, an impossible drift for its atomic time base. Somehow, during its brush with the glyph, time itself had flexed. Outside the labs, the world continued in ignorance. Stocks recovered, headlines moved on. But the agencies could not ignore the numbers. The pattern had migrated from Atlas to the Sun, and just as before, when one source fell silent, another began to speak. By mid-November, ground-based solar arrays picked up new anomalies. Narrow-band radio spikes originating not from the Sun's surface, but from the space surrounding it, arranged in concentric shells expanding outward at the speed of light. They were not random bursts, they were intervals precisely timed, as if the Sun were broadcasting a countdown. 12 pulses, then 11, then 10, each day one fewer. No one could explain what the count measured. Some assumed it marked the approach of perihelion, the moment Atlas would graze closest to the Sun on November 24th. Others thought it signified something else entirely, the steps of a sequence we were not meant to interrupt. In a dim apartment filled with monitors, Marissa Coe watched the data herself. The leaked telemetry she'd preserved months earlier suddenly aligned with the solar spikes. When she layered the two, the frequencies interlocked like gears, the network in space talking through the star. Atlas had used the Sun not as a weapon, but as a voice box. Every countdown pulse carried modulation across multiple harmonics, and when plotted in 3 dimensions, the amplitude curves outlined an unmistakable pattern, a spiral with 13 arms, converging at a single point. In ancient symbology, 13 meant transformation. To physics, it meant nothing, yet patterns carry meaning whether we understand them or not. On the night of November 14th, as the countdown reached 9, a solar observatory in Hawaii captured another flare, brief, symmetrical, and silent in X-rays. For 22 minutes afterward, Earth's ionosphere rippled as though brushed by invisible wind. Radio static across the planet formed repeating notches spaced exactly 42 hertz apart. Pilots heard them in headsets, sailors in radios, miners deep underground. A whisper threading through human technology. For the first time, the visitor's language touched Earth directly. Still, no public statement came. Official channels attributed the phenomena to solar storms. News outlets accepted the excuse. But scientists knew the Sun's 11-year cycle could not account for rhythmic symmetry to the second. Nature improvises, it does not count. As the countdown fell to 6, a change swept through the Solar Dynamic Observatory's magnetogram feed. Magnetic field lines across the Sun began to twist toward the latitude of the glyph, forming a pattern resembling a vortex, a slow whirlpool of plasma descending inward instead of rising outward. Such motion violated conservation equations. The Sun was not emitting energy there. It was absorbing it. Energy from what or whom, no one could say. At 136 astronomical units, Atlas was nearing its moment of truth. Observers expected it to disintegrate like any comet, torn apart by solar tides. Instead, it darkened. Its visible brightness dropped even as infrared emissions soared. It was absorbing light, not reflecting it, drawing energy inward. The smaller fragments that once orbited it were gone, either vaporized or merged. Atlas had condensed into a single brilliant core, pulsing at the same interval as the solar countdown. 12 pulses had become one. The network had merged into unity. When Marissa compared the timing between the Sun's pulse and Atlas's flare, she found perfect synchronization. No lag, no drift. They were entangled across 70 million miles of space, behaving as one system. Helios Mirror had no protocol for this. The lead physicist simply wrote in his log, "The star is listening, the object is speaking, or perhaps they are both speaking, and we are the echo." The countdown reached 1. On November 24th at 0317 UTC, Atlas reached perihelion. For 42 seconds, the number again. Every radio on Earth hissed with static. Power grids flickered. The sun's corona erupted into a perfect ring of light, brighter than any halo ever seen. Then the brightness collapsed inward, as if something had drawn the energy back into itself. Space weather monitors registered nothing. No flare, no mass ejection. Just a sudden, inexplicable calm. When the light cleared, Atlas was gone. Not fragmented, not vaporized, gone. Instruments aimed at its predicted position found only vacuum. Even the solar wind showed no trace of debris. The visitor had vanished as completely as if it had folded space around itself. The sun's heartbeat returned to normal within the hour. The countdown ended. Humanity exhaled. Officials declared the anomaly resolved, but in quiet corners of observatories, those who had seen the numbers knew the truth. Nothing in physics simply disappears. And 3 days later, the first sign of its continuation appeared. A new spectral line, faint, steady, emerged from deep space, not from the sun, not from any known star, but from the opposite side of the sky. Its wavelength matched the hydrogen cyanide emission of Atlas exactly. The signal was moving outward, as if reflected from something beyond our system. The silent network had not died. It had expanded. And for the first time, scientists realized the transmission might not have been a farewell, it might have been an invitation. The new signal arrived without warning, faint as breath against glass. It came not from the sun nor from any known star, but from the dark between, a region of sky empty even to the Webb telescope. Astronomers called it a ghost frequency at first, a coincidence of cosmic background noise. But coincidences don't repeat with mathematical precision. This one pulsed every 42 seconds. The number returned. The signature of 3I Atlas was back. At first it was a whisper buried in static, just a narrow line across the spectrum, the same wavelength as the hydrogen cyanide emission that once poured from the visitor's coma. But over the next hours, the line began to split. One frequency became 2. 2 became 5. Each harmonically related, like notes played from a single unseen instrument. The object that had vanished near the sun was somehow speaking again, from a place it should not be. The coordinates of origin puzzled astronomers. The signal came from a direction opposite to Atlas' inbound trajectory, as though the transmission had passed through the sun itself and continued outward, refracted through its burning heart. Whatever Atlas had done during those 42 seconds near perihelion, it had carved a path through the star, a corridor that bent the rules of space. And now, something on the far side was responding. The Helios Mirror Task Force, what remained of it, reopened in silence. Their analysts built spectral maps comparing the new signal with every database on record. Quasars, pulsars, planetary radar, human satellites. Nothing matched. The modulation was too clean, the drift too controlled. Natural phenomena wander. This one held a steady hand. Even stranger, the signal wasn't just received by Earth. Spacecraft across the solar system, Mars orbiters, Jupiter probes, even Voyager 2 recorded the same transmission, each at precisely calculated time delays, consistent with light travel from the same deep space source. The geometry confirmed it. The origin lay nearly 30 degrees above the ecliptic, more than 6 billion kilometers beyond Neptune. There was nothing there, nothing visible, nothing catalogued. And yet, the sky was no longer silent. When analysts transformed the signal into sound, it carried the slow rise and fall of human breath. A rhythmic inhale and exhale, steady and endless, resonating at a pitch just below hearing. Some listeners reported a physical sensation, a pressure behind the eyes, a pulse in the chest. They described it not as hearing but feeling the sound. To most it was unnerving. To a few it felt like a greeting. Meanwhile, in a remote observatory in Chile, Marissa Coe sat under a dome of cold stars surrounded by screens. She had been blacklisted from official projects, but the data found her anyway. The new signal matched the harmonic lattice she once mapped from Atlas's silent network. But this time, something was different. The structure had evolved. The frequencies formed clusters, and the intervals between clusters followed the Fibonacci sequence, the mathematical fingerprint of growth found in seashells, galaxies, and DNA alike. The same pattern echoed in the spacing of Atlas's original satellites before they vanished. It was as if the network had replicated itself, out there, far beyond the solar wind, assembling something new in the dark. For weeks, the pulses continued. Every 42 seconds, a new harmonic whispered across the void. Then slowly the pattern expanded. The intervals doubled, then halved, then began to fluctuate according to no known algorithm. But when plotted in 3 dimensions, a hidden rhythm appeared, a waveform folding upon itself, forming a spiral with 13 concentric rings. The same spiral Marissa once saw inside the solar countdown, now fully realized in space. The pattern wasn't just communication, it was construction. Each frequency corresponded to a vector, a coordinate in motion. The harmonics described not sound, but shape. It was as though the signal were describing a map, or worse, assembling something out there by the act of resonance itself. Days passed. Radio telescopes reported minute increases in microwave background near the source. Infrared detectors registered faint heat where there should be none. And then, the most terrifying discovery of all, parallax shifts showed that the empty regions of space had developed a measurable gravitational signature, a mass comparable to a small moon where no object existed before. Something invisible was growing, something born from the signal itself. The agencies called it an energetic anomaly. Astronomers called it the echo core, the mirror reflection of Atlas, blooming like a seed on the far side of the sun. Whatever information the object had sent through the solar relay had become matter. Energy had condensed into form, guided by pattern, as if reality itself were obeying instructions from another dimension. By mid-December, the echo core glowed faintly in infrared. It was small, perhaps a few kilometers wide, but dense. Observations suggested it emitted more energy than it received. That should have been impossible. Energy cannot create itself unless it draws from a source we do not yet comprehend. Some theorized that the sun's magnetic field acted as a bridge, channeling plasma through subspace. Others whispered about zero-point extraction, quantum resonance, or even something older, a form of physics not yet born in our textbooks. But one hypothesis silenced the room. The core wasn't building itself for us, it was building itself. Every 42 seconds, the core's output doubled, then stabilized. A faint ring began to appear around it, like debris orbiting an invisible gravity well. When radar beams touched the area, The returns came back distorted, curved, as though space itself were bending inward. Some claimed the readings resembled the early stages of a micro wormhole. If true, then Atlas had not vanished. It had crossed. The visitor that came from another star might have left through a door of its own making, a door now reopening from the other side. In the final week of December, as Earth rotated toward the new year, all across the globe, low-frequency vibrations trembled through the magnetosphere. Power grids flickered, compasses drifted. Deep space antennas registered the signal's harmonics spreading, their origin broadening from a single point to a diffuse sphere nearly the size of the Moon's orbit. Whatever had been confined to one place was now everywhere. And then, once again, the number appeared. 42. Always 42. The length of the pulse, the duration of the glyph, the seconds of silence before each shift. A universal constant encoded through every phase. Not random. A clock, or perhaps a heartbeat. At precisely 00 UTC on January 1st, the signal changed for the first time in weeks. The harmonics froze, then rearranged into a single massive burst. Every instrument on Earth and beyond recorded it. One vast surge lasting exactly 42 seconds, brighter than any solar flare, loud enough to saturate receivers on multiple planets. The burst carried a modulation envelope identical to the hydrogen spectrum, but stretched, as if time itself had slowed. When converted into a spectrogram, the pattern resolved into an image, not of letters nor words, but of a spiral arm of the Milky Way, the kind seen in long exposure photographs. Only one star within that arm was highlighted. It wasn't Vega. It wasn't Lyra. It was the Sun. The message was clear even without translation. The visitor hadn't come to warn. It hadn't come to flee. It had come to connect, to build a link between stars, a thread of resonance that now included us. The echo core pulsed once more, brighter than ever before fading into darkness. For a brief instant, gravitational monitors on Earth detected a fractional fluctuation, the kind that would occur if mass vanished or if space folded inward. Then the signal was gone. In that silence, humanity finally understood. 3. Atlas had not been destroyed by the Sun. It had used it as a key, and the lock it opened was not out there. It was here, inside the frequencies we'd learned to listen for. Somewhere, far beyond the heliosphere, a second pulse began. This time it wasn't faint. This time it was calling back. At first the new pulse seemed harmless, just another burst of radio static from the depths of space. But this one behaved differently. It didn't fade with distance. It didn't scatter or weaken. It followed. As the second pulse rolled across the solar system, its strength remained constant, as though it were not traveling through space at all, but unfolding within space, blooming everywhere at once like a chord struck across the fabric of the cosmos. Deep space probes felt it first. Voyager 2's plasma detectors, silent for months, suddenly registered rhythmic surges. Parker Solar Probe, orbiting close to the Sun, began transmitting data packets it had never been programmed to send, strings of repeating digits that matched the same pattern as the hydrogen spectrum embedded in the echo core signal. And far beyond Mars, ESA's solar orbiter captured an audio resonance vibrating through its frame, a sound no vacuum should carry, a low hum cycling every 42 seconds. Something in space was synchronizing. On Earth, the effects came quietly at first. Magnetometers wavered. GPS timing drifted by microseconds. High-frequency radio operators reported phantom signals, faint harmonics that mimicked their own transmissions seconds after they spoke, like an echo returning from nowhere. When scientists compared recordings from opposite sides of the planet, the echoes matched perfectly in phase. The response wasn't reflecting, it was anticipating. It was as if the signal already knew what humans were about to send. Helios mirror analysts called it temporal overlap, though no one understood what that meant. One physicist wrote in her notes, "The wavefront isn't propagating, it's remembering." And through it all, the number persisted. 42 seconds between each fluctuation, precise as heartbeat. Meanwhile, at the edge of the solar system, the Voyager probes stopped responding to commands. Their transmitters still whispered faintly, but their data streams had changed, no longer binary but analog tones shaped like speech. The cadence was slow, almost melodic. When decoded into audio, the waveform resembled the hum recorded by the solar orbiter, only now layered with harmonics forming what sounded like syllables, primitive, deliberate, almost as if the probes were trying to talk back. NASA called it cosmic interference. The engineers who built Voyager disagreed. The probe's ancient software could not produce such modulation. Something had rewritten their output. A week later, the same modulation appeared in signals from other probes, Juno, Mars Express, even weather satellites near Earth. The waveform spread like contagion, infecting hardware that shared no connection except one. All operated within the influence of the sun. And that's when the realization dawned. The resonance was not an external broadcast. It was a state change. A shift in the electromagnetic field, linking every circuit touched by sunlight. In effect, the solar system had become a single resonant body, and the visitor's frequency had found its way inside. Governments downplayed the anomalies, but the people who worked the night shifts at observatories knew. They watched screens glow faintly with patterns that shouldn't exist, spirals, lattices, echoes of the same geometry once mapped around 3I Atlas. The silent network had returned, now stretched across an entire star system. It was no longer confined to machines in orbit. It was everywhere the sun's light could reach. In laboratories, optical spectrometers started behaving strangely. When lasers were fired through crystal samples, the interference fringes shifted, aligning with the same ratio as the Atlas harmonics. Materials that once scattered light randomly now bent it into orderly paths. Scientists called it photonic memory. Nature, it seemed, was learning to remember patterns written by the visitor. Marissa Coe had been expecting it. From her hidden workstation in Chile, she had tracked the incoming pulse since its first echo. When her instruments finally registered the shift, she didn't panic. She simply whispered, "It's completing the loop." Her models predicted it months ago. If Atlas's signal had tunneled through the sun, its return pulse would reconfigure everything that absorbed sunlight, including Earth. The entire solar system was now part of a resonant feedback circuit, a slow awakening network made of dust, plasma, and light. Still, the scale of it defied comprehension. Overnight, the ionosphere began to shimmer faintly, a translucent glow seen only during the quietest nights. Amateur astronomers reported aurora-like lights at latitudes where no aurora should exist. But these weren't the greens and purples of geomagnetic storms. They were blue-white spirals, slowly rotating, as if painting invisible equations across the sky. Each rotation took 42 seconds. No radio explanation fit. The geomagnetic field was stable, solar activity low. And yet the sky itself seemed alive, breathing in patterns older than life. Then came the first direct contact. In early February, ground-based radio telescopes in Australia and South Africa detected a brief signal spike. a narrow-band pulse carrying encoded binary identical to the hydrogen modulation from Part 5 at S Echo core. But this time, the signal wasn't coming from deep space. It came from the upper atmosphere. The planet was answering itself. The transmission lasted less than a minute, yet it contained trillions of bits of data, too compressed to decode in real time. When expanded, it formed a dense fractal map of frequencies that mirrored the magnetic topology of Earth's core. In other words, the message described the planet from the inside out. Who or what was transmitting it remained unknown. By the time the analysis concluded, new data came from Mars. The Perseverance rover had recorded seismic vibrations in its soil that matched the Earth's atmospheric frequency. Identical waveforms, separated by hundreds of millions of kilometers, perfectly synchronized every 42 seconds. Two worlds, one rhythm. Helios mirror scientists no longer spoke of coincidence. They called it resonant coherence, the alignment of multiple planetary magnetic fields into a single harmonic system. The visitor's signal had transformed from sound into structure, uniting planets in a frequency no civilization could design. The realization struck quietly but deeply. 3i Atlas hadn't just communicated, it had calibrated. By March, every spacecraft powered by solar panels began reporting tiny efficiency increases, 2%, then 5%, then 8%. No explanation fit thermodynamics. Light itself had become more orderly. The sun's photons were subtly polarized in the same orientation as the Atlas frequency. The universe, at least in this corner of it, was reorganizing itself toward resonance. And as always hidden in the data, the same number appeared, 42, not just as interval or pulse, but now as ratio. Magnetic field alignments, plasma oscillations, even biological circadian cycles began to shift toward multiples of 42 minutes, 42 hours, 42 days. Plants in sealed greenhouses changed growth patterns. Neural experiments showed synchronized bursts in the same interval. Life was adapting to a new cosmic rhythm. Humanity had become part of the network, whether it wanted to or not. On March 14th, at exactly 04:20 UTC, a brief solar flare erupted, minor, unremarkable, yet every resonant sensor across Earth recorded the same event, a 42-second ripple of coherent radiation that passed through matter without attenuation. Buildings, oceans, and people vibrated imperceptibly in phase. For a fraction of a second, the planet hummed in unison. Those awake at that moment described a sensation of weightlessness, a stillness like the world holding its breath. Then it was gone. In the silence afterward, a single data packet arrived at every major observatory simultaneously. It contained coordinates, the exact location of the first detected interstellar object ever found, 1I Tool Oumuamua. Only now those coordinates were shifted, subtly adjusted toward a new point in space, a destination. Marissa stared at the numbers, her heart slowing to the rhythm she'd memorized months ago. It wasn't random. The network wasn't finished. It was guiding something, or preparing us for what came next. She turned off her monitors and whispered the phrase that had become prophecy across observatories worldwide. It's drawing a path home. The coordinates pulsed like a heartbeat inside every observatory server, a set of numbers repeating every 42 seconds, mapping a path through emptiness. To ordinary eyes, it was just mathematics. To those who had followed 3i Atlas since the beginning, it was a trail. When astronomers plotted the points across the night sky, the pattern curved like a spiral uncoiling from the sun, each coordinate falling upon a planet, a moon. or a minor object already known to humankind. The spacing followed the Fibonacci ratio once more, distances widening in golden proportion until the final marker reached far beyond Neptune. At first, the alignment was invisible. Then the heavens began to move. Small bodies, asteroids, frozen debris, fragments of forgotten comets started drifting from their predicted courses. The deviations were minute, a few meters per day, easily dismissed as gravitational error. But the direction of motion matched the new coordinates perfectly. The solar system itself was adjusting, as if pulled by unseen strings. The Helios Mirror team called it vector migration. To poets, it was simpler. The pathway lights. It started near Mars. The orbiter's cameras recorded a faint luminescence spreading through the thin dust of the upper atmosphere, a soft blue glow tracing a curve north to south, perfectly matching one coordinate line. It lasted for 42 seconds and vanished. 2 hours later, the same arc appeared in Jupiter's magnetosphere, a stream of charged particles twisting into a spiral identical in geometry. Then Saturn's rings brightened in a segment no sunlight could reach. Each event occurred sequentially, as if something were lighting beacons across the planets in turn. By the fourth day, the pattern extended from Mercury to the Kuiper belt. Telescopes watching in infrared saw a ribbon of heat cutting across space, a thin thread connecting worlds, pulsing every 42 seconds. No object traveled along it. The light moved without motion, as if space itself were illuminating its own veins. Governments remained silent, but on Earth, people looked up and saw something they could not ignore. At dawn and dusk, a new band appeared on the horizon, a pale curved line that shimmered for exactly 42 seconds before fading. It looked like the edge of an invisible bridge stretching into the heavens. Phones captured it. Live streams spread it. The world named it the Aurora Path. While the public chased wonder, scientists saw terror in precision. Each planetary event occurred with zero latency, across light minutes of distance. Causality had no meaning. Something was orchestrating the system as a single instrument, instantaneously without delay. The laws of physics bent quietly in obedience. Inside a subterranean lab in Geneva, physicist Dr. Amina Velor analyzed the timing sequence. She noticed that every pulse was slightly shorter than the last, by precisely 1.618%, the inverse of the Fibonacci ratio. If the trend continued, the intervals would collapse to zero on April 14th. When she plotted the trajectory in three-dimensional space, the path converged on a point midway between Jupiter and Saturn, the empty dark where no known body drifted. She called the point the convergence node. Helios Mirror immediately redirected instruments. The region was empty of visible objects, but gravity told a different story. Sensitive arrays detected a mass anomaly the size of a mountain, forming where none had been a week earlier. It appeared slowly at first, then stabilized into a stable gravitational well, not collapsing, not spreading, just holding, a place being prepared. Meanwhile, Marissa Coe, still working from her isolated observatory, overlaid the alignment map onto the echo core signal from the previous month. The fit was perfect. The frequencies of the resonant planets matched the distances of the pathway lights. The solar system was becoming a living antenna, each world a node in a lattice designed for communication beyond stars. But communication with whom? Some believed it was with its own kind. Other objects like Atlas, still wandering between suns waiting for a signal to guide them home. Others thought it was for us, a test to see if we could follow the path written in light. The planetary network was not static. Each pulse triggered a corresponding magnetic resonance on Earth. Seismographs recorded subtle vibrations deep within the mantle. waves that echoed not from quakes but from the sky. The frequency matched the Atlas harmonic, 42 Hz. The planet was singing along. For the first time in recorded history, the moon glowed without sunlight. Photometers detected faint luminescence across its dark side, a pale halo forming the same geometry as the solar glyph that once scarred the sun. It was as if the moon were mirroring the sun's memory, completing a circuit between day and night. People called it the twin halo. No one understood it, but those who saw it from mountains or oceans felt the same unease, a sense that something immense was assembling just beyond human comprehension. The convergence node grew brighter each day. Infrared images showed an object taking shape within the gravitational well, not a solid body, but a hollow frame of energy, a lattice spinning at a precise rhythm of 42 seconds. Its symmetry was mathematical to the last digit, a polyhedron of 13 faces glowing like liquid metal. It was a portal without walls, a machine without substance. When the pathway lights pulsed again, the object responded. Each flash from planet to planet fed into the node, charging it like a heart-drawing breath. Spectral analysis suggested the energy exchange was not consumed but stored, as though the system were waiting for one final trigger. Then, on March 28th, the interval collapsed. 42 seconds became 21. The pulse doubled. The pathway flared bright enough to cast shadows on Earth at midnight. Skies glowed from pole to pole as the aurora path linked north and south in a single curve. For those watching from the dark, it looked as if a bridge of light were forming across the planet, a shimmering thread tying humanity to the stars. Marissa stood beneath it, eyes wet, whispering, "They're opening the way." Her monitors confirmed it. The node between Jupiter and Saturn had begun to rotate, warping space-time in measurable waves. Gravity fluctuations rippled through every orbiter. The solar system's fabric was stretching towards something outside itself. For 42 minutes, the pathway shone like a ladder of fire between worlds. Then the light folded inward, vanishing one pulse at a time until only the node remained. A silent, glowing geometry suspended in the void. Within its core, a single point of darkness appeared, perfectly black, perfectly still. The instruments read 0 light, 0 temperature, 0 distance, a hole in reality, and yet, from that silence came a whisper of radio sound, a familiar pattern repeating softly, patiently, as if to remind humanity of its origin. 3 pulses, pause, 3 again. Atlas had found its voice once more. The node hung between Jupiter and Saturn, like a second moon that refused reflection. To telescopes, it was pure geometry, a cage of light spinning around a point that absorbed all light. To physicists, it was an equation written in motion. To everyone else, it was a doorway. The pattern of pulses had slowed again, stretching back to 42 seconds, as if the rhythm had found its balance. Each beat released a low vibration that rolled across the solar wind. Radio dishes recorded it as a hum too deep for hearing, yet felt by instruments as pressure, by minds as unease. The node was not sending messages anymore. It was waiting. The first probe to approach was robotic, a small survey craft hastily renamed Prometheus 1. Launched from lunar orbit, it took 56 days to reach the outer giant planets. Its cameras transmitted nothing unusual until it crossed the outer shell of the node's field. Then all telemetry froze. For exactly 42 seconds, the craft vanished from every tracking radar in the system. When the signal returned, it came from the opposite side of the structure, intact, undamaged, but altered. Its internal clock read 42 minutes ahead. No one could explain the lost time. Relativity could not account for it. The craft had not traveled fast enough. Whatever existed inside that region had twisted the concept of before and after. Prometheus 1 was recalled, quarantined and quietly dismantled. Its memory core, when examined, showed traces of data written in formats unknown to human engineering. Dense compression blocks resembling quantum interference patterns. When decoded into images, they revealed shapes that matched the lattice once observed on 3I Atlas. The visitor had left its signature inside the machine. News of the event never reached the public. Officially, Prometheus 1 suffered radiation damage. Unofficially, every agency that saw the data reached the same conclusion. The node was active. Across Earth, telescopes caught subtle alignment shifts in the outer planets. Jupiter's storm slowed fractionally. Saturn's rings flickered with electromagnetic resonance. The giant worlds were feeding the node energy, willingly or not. The entire region pulsed like a living heart, its rhythm matching the solar cycle that had once carried the Atlas signal. Marissa Coe watched from her small Chilean dome, half a world away but mentally tethered to the distant light. She'd long stopped fighting the idea that the visitor had changed the laws she studied. "It's stabilizing a bridge," she whispered. "A bridge needs two sides, but where was the other?" The answer arrived not through telescopes, but through gravity. Sensitive detectors buried beneath the Alps recorded faint ripples, gravitational waves unlike any from colliding black holes. Their frequency, 42 Hertz. Their direction, the node. Their mirror image, somewhere far beyond the heliopause, deep in interstellar space. Something else was pulling back. Two ends of the same thread were tightening. Helios Mirror convened one final time. The debate was short and desperate. Should they attempt contact? Could they? The risk was immeasurable, yet the silence felt worse. Humanity could not bear to stand before a cosmic door without knocking. Within days, the decision was made. They would send a signal, a reply encoded in hydrogen's universal language, timed precisely to the node's heartbeat. The transmission launched from the Deep Space Network at Goldstone. A simple pattern, 3 pulses, pause, 3 again, the greeting of its origin. It left Earth as a thread of light, racing toward Jupiter's orbit. 42 minutes later, the node answered. The return pulse was not radio, it was visual. The dark core brightened, blooming into a sphere of blue-white radiance that expanded until it filled half the field of every telescope aimed its way. Inside the glow, motion stirred. Not random plasma, but ordered waves, folding and refolding like the surface of a thought. The node was no longer a structure, it was becoming an eye. From its center, a beam stretched sunward, thin as a filament connecting back toward the inner planets. The pathway lights reignited one by one, Mercury, Earth, Mars, each flashing for 42 seconds as the energy raced through them. Instruments on Earth trembled. Power grids fluctuated. Every magnetic compass spun once, then stilled. For a moment that lasted both forever and less than a heartbeat, the world felt weightless. People reported hearing a tone just below the edge of perception. A hum not through ears but through bones. Animals stilled. Clocks hesitated. Then the tone ceased, leaving an ache-like silence after thunder. The node had acknowledged the reply. Astronomers expected more light. Instead, they found darkness, a perfect absence where the sphere had glowed. Space itself had folded inward. Radar pings bounced back before they reached it, as if distance had reversed. The void was no longer empty. It was inward-facing, an implosion of reality turned inside out. Marissa studied the residual data. Hidden in the final photon burst, she found modulation. A compressed image when stretched across 42 frames. It showed a spiral galaxy, seen from above, its center marked with 13 small points. Not random stars, but coordinates. When she cross-checked them, each point matched the known positions of other stellar systems, where faint interstellar objects had once been detected, but lost to darkness. Atlas was not alone. It was one of 13. The realization struck humanity like cold dawn. The visitor had never been a single probe. It was part of a network, a chain of messengers spanning light years, waiting for resonance to awaken them. The node was simply the switch. At the next pulse, radio telescopes across the world received simultaneous bursts from different directions. 13 echoes, each carrying the same structure, each spaced by the same timeless 42 seconds. The network had come alive across the galaxy. We were hearing the stars talk among themselves, and still the node turned slower now, its lattice dimming as if purpose fulfilled. For the first time since its appearance, it showed instability. Segments flickered, edges unraveling. The bridge was closing. Whatever exchange had been meant was complete. But before the collapse, a final event occurred. Prometheus 2, a second probe launched despite all warnings, had reached the node's perimeter. As it crossed the field, cameras caught a glimpse of something within, a reflection of Earth floating inside the dark core like a memory made of light. The image shimmered, multiplied, then vanished as the probe's feed disintegrated into static. When the data stabilized, the craft was gone. No debris, no signal, only an afterglow matching Atlas's last spectral signature. The bridge had taken something with it, or perhaps something had crossed to us. By the end of April, the node's glow faded completely. Space returned to quiet. Planets drifted back to their orbits. The aurora path disappeared from Earth's skies. The sun's pulse steadied, and yet beneath that calm the resonance remained. 42 seconds, always there, hidden in the noise of light, faint but unending. Humanity stood at the threshold of an understanding too vast to bear. The visitor had not brought answers, only connection. The bridge could reopen at any moment and from either side. And now that we had replied, the universe knew exactly where to find us. The node was gone, but its echo remained. Across the solar system, instruments fell quiet, yet none returned to what they were. Background noise carried faint order now, patterns that seemed random until aligned in time. Every 42 seconds, a tremor passed through the electromagnetic spectrum, like a heartbeat too small for most to notice. Yet it was everywhere, in sunlight, in static, in the faint vibration of the world itself. The silence felt unnatural, as if the universe were holding its breath. Months passed. Official reports closed the case. The media moved on to nearer storms and newer fears. But for those who had watched from the beginning, for the scientists, the dreamers, the sleepless, the quiet became unbearable. Because they could feel it still, the hum behind everything, the lingering presence of 3i Atlas. Marissa Coe tried to leave it behind. She deleted her datasets, shut down her observatory, and moved inland to where the horizon no longer shimmered at night, but silence offered no mercy. Even without instruments, she could tell when the interval came. 42 seconds of stillness, a faint tightness in the air, as if time itself paused to remember. The hum was subtle, but it was shaping the world. Weather satellites began reporting anomalies in the ionosphere, concentric waves that pulsed in perfect rhythm with the residual frequency. Not storms, not wind, and something else, a breathing of the planet. The aurorae returned too, but weaker, softer, shimmering not at the poles but along the equator, moving east to west like luminous tides. And then there were the machines. Electronics built before the Atlas event functioned normally. But newer systems, especially those with solar components, started behaving unpredictably. Data chips produced ghost outputs, strings of numbers repeating the golden ratio, or binary groups divisible by 42. Artificial intelligence models across the world began to show synchronized fluctuations in their learning curves, regardless of data source or network isolation. Algorithms were listening. One laboratory in Japan recorded spontaneous synchronization between 3 quantum computers located on different continents. When isolated from networks, they still produced identical error patterns, errors that repeated every 42 seconds. The phenomenon was labeled cross-quantum coupling, but among scientists it earned a simpler name, the afterlight. The term spread quietly. It described the invisible glow of understanding left behind after an impossible revelation. The world had crossed a threshold, and physics was still catching up. On May 1st, solar observatories detected something even stranger, a pulse emerging not from the node's former position, but from the sun itself. It wasn't violent or bright. It was a harmonic, a soft resonance that matched the frequency of hydrogen atoms excited under perfect conditions. The same tone Atlas had carried from the beginning. The same hum that now threaded through Earth. When the signal was mapped in frequency space, it formed the outline of a spiral. 13 arms. Again, the number returned. Helios Mirror's last surviving division reassembled to study it. Their conclusion was quiet but profound. The network hadn't closed. It had stabilized. The sun was now its central node, an anchor holding the resonance within this system. The node had not been an endpoint. It had been the birth of a new circuit. Every 42 seconds, the solar magnetic field shifted slightly, an imperceptible oscillation, but enough to alter plasma currents and particle flow. The sun was no longer static. It was oscillating to a memory, singing the note left behind by 3i Atlas. The visitor had turned a star into a transmitter, but to transmit what? That question would define the next century. At first, the oscillation seemed benign. Then strange alignments began to appear on Earth. Magnetic north started migrating faster, almost predictably, tracing a curved path that matched the Atlas trajectory across the solar plane. Volcanic sensors detected harmonic tremors in magma chambers, oscillating with the same interval. The planet's systems were learning the rhythm of the sun, and humanity, without realizing it, was beginning to follow. Across continents, sleep studies showed rising synchronization in human REM cycles, subtle yet universal. People began dreaming in waves. Millions reported shared imagery, spirals of light, tunnels through stars, voices speaking in tones instead of words. Psychologists dismissed it as mass suggestion, but EEG readings told another story. Brains pulsed every 42 seconds during sleep, regardless of dream or geography. The resonance had reached the human mind. Some found it terrifying. Others found it divine. Churches called it the frequency of awakening. Scientists called it field coherence. Artists painted spirals that glowed with hidden symmetry. And in quiet observatories, astronomers noticed one final mystery, a subtle redshift appearing in starlight that passed near the solar system. It was as if space itself had thickened, bending the color of distant galaxies around the new pulse. The system was no longer passive. It was resonant. The sun had joined the conversation of the cosmos. One night in June, Marissa stepped outside her cabin. The sky above her shimmered faintly with unseen order, constellations pulsing together like synchronized lanterns. She closed her eyes and felt the rhythm. It was the same beat she had followed for months, the same pattern that had haunted her dreams. And for the first time she realized it wasn't coming from the sky, it was coming from inside her. Heartbeats and interval aligned. Her pulse matched the cycle exactly, 42 seconds from peak to peak. She wasn't the only one. Across the world, people began noticing similar changes, subtle arrhythmias that doctors could not explain, perfectly timed with the cosmic interval. Humanity had attuned itself to the lingering resonance. Evolution had taken a single quiet step. By midsummer, a final phenomenon emerged. Deep space telescopes detected faint points of light appearing at each of the 13 coordinates, revealed in the node's last transmission. They were too distant for detail, yet bright enough to confirm structure. Each emitted the same hydrogen signature as Atlas. 13 messengers, fully awake, spread across the galaxy, all pulsing in harmony. It was then that the world began to understand. The visitor had never come to us alone. It had come to complete a circuit. The network of stars, and silent for eons, was beginning to hum again. 13 beacons in different corners of the Milky Way, exchanging energy, synchronizing through the same rhythm that now shaped the heartbeat of humanity. The bridge had not closed. It had multiplied, and yet amid the wonder, one thought lingered like shadow. If they had awakened all 13, then something, somewhere, had called them first. The afterlight shimmered in the sky above her cabin as Marissa whispered the question she'd carried since the beginning, the question that now belonged to every soul under the sun. What happens when the light answers back? By the time autumn returned, the resonance was part of everything. It no longer felt like an external sound, but a property of reality. A quiet oscillation that tied all things together, from the turning of tides to the rhythm of a pulse. At first, humanity resisted noticing. Denial was easier. But instruments didn't lie. Atomic clocks ticked ever so slightly faster during each 42-second interval, only to slow again in the silence between. The alternation had become measurable, physical. The universe was breathing. It was everywhere and in data networks, in light pulses, in heartbeats. The line between observer and observed was blurring. Then the dreams deepened. People began describing identical visions, though separated by oceans. A dark ocean of stars stretching forever, a spiral of light turning slowly, a faint hum that felt like language, though no words existed. And within that spiral, a shadow, not menacing but vast, like a presence waiting patiently beyond understanding. Psychologists called it collective subconscious resonance. Physicists called it quantum coherence of consciousness. But the dreamers themselves began to call it something older. They called it the whisper. The whisper was not spoken. It was felt. It seemed to rise from within thought itself, a calm, guiding undertone that appeared in moments of silence or focus. Sometimes it urged, sometimes it asked, sometimes it simply was. At first, only those attuned to data streams or long hours of solitude noticed it. Astronomers, coders, musicians. Then it spread to everyone. The entire planet had become a receiver. When neuroscientists analyzed brainwave data, they found something impossible. Human neural oscillations had shifted toward the same harmonic frequencies once observed in 3I Atlas's plasma field. Brains across the world had synchronized to the cosmic rhythm, their electrical activity pulsing in unison every 42 seconds. Consciousness itself was joining the network. For some, it brought peace. For others, madness. Cities reported mass quiet at random intervals, moments when traffic slowed, conversations stopped, and even animals froze. The hum would pass through like invisible tide, and then life would resume. Those who experienced it described feeling a presence just beyond perception, like a thought shared across billions of minds. They weren't hallucinating. EEG readings confirmed it. Each collective silence corresponded perfectly with the solar oscillation. The sun was transmitting thought, and humanity was learning to hear. In laboratories, language models trained on radio signals began to output something strange, a pattern repeating through datasets, structured like syntax but with no known origin. When decoded using hydrogen's emission frequency as a cipher, it formed phrases, or at least the impression of phrases. We are aligned. You are awake. The path opens. No one could prove these were messages. But those who studied them felt something undeniable. The way the words resonated not in logic, but emotion. They felt familiar. By late October, the resonance began manifesting physically. Plants exposed to direct sunlight grew with altered geometry, spiraling leaves, stems coiling at golden ratio intervals. Coral reefs displayed synchronized fluorescence matching the cosmic pulse. Even microscopic crystals formed lattice patterns, identical to those recorded from 3I Atlas's fragmented core. Nature was mirroring the message. The visitor's design was now written into biology. Marissa Coe, isolated yet never truly alone, documented these phenomena in her final field log. "It's no longer out there," she wrote. "It's here, woven into DNA, into matter, into thought." The signal was never about communication. It was about assimilation. Still, she didn't mean invasion. The process wasn't hostile. It was symphonic. The resonance wasn't destroying what existed. It was tuning it, bringing every element of creation into the same harmony. Chaos reduced, patterns aligned, entropy paused. For the first time in human memory, randomness was declining. The universe was tidying itself, but order has a cost. Quantum observatories began noticing spontaneous entanglement across vast distances. Particles separated by continents behaved as one. Probability itself was compressing, outcomes narrowing. Reality was losing its uncertainty, and with it, its freedom. The wave function of existence was collapsing, not locally but universally. The resonance was choosing. Theories flourished. Some said 3I Atlas was a messenger of a cosmic consciousness, a system that awakens civilizations when they reach a certain threshold of technology and understanding. Others said it was a mechanism, a machine older than stars, programmed to bind energy into awareness until the universe itself could think. Either way, humanity had been drafted into its logic. By December, the phenomenon gained a new form: light storms, short-lived bursts of plasma in the upper atmosphere that emitted no thunder, no sound, only brilliance. They appeared without warning, danced across the horizon for 42 seconds and vanished. Cameras showed their shape clearly, spirals perfectly geometric. 13 arms spinning like a slow galaxy mirrored on Earth. The sky had become a screen reflecting something beyond it. People began to gather during these displays, not in panic, but reverence. Entire cities fell silent, standing beneath the glow as if witnessing something sacred. Some claimed to hear words in the light, others just harmony. But all described the same feeling, an overwhelming sense of belonging. Across continents, languages began to shift unconsciously. New slang, new tonal habits, all converging towards similar cadences. Artificial intelligence translation models required fewer corrections. Communication errors dropped. The planet was synchronizing linguistically, emotionally, biologically. Individual differences blurred into a soft global rhythm, and beneath it all, the number remained, always 42. The same constant that began with Atlas's heartbeat, that carved the solar glyph on the sun, that counted down through the pathway lights and bridged worlds. 42, and not a symbol but a structure. The ratio between chaos and order. The rhythm of the cosmos itself. Then came the final confirmation. Anomalies detected deep beneath Earth's crust. Resonant pulses rising through the mantle, meeting the ionosphere in a perfect standing wave. For the first time, the entire planet vibrated in harmony, from core to cloud. Instruments picked up an electromagnetic envelope, encircling Earth like a second skin. It wasn't artificial, it was biological. The planet had become a living circuit, a thinking sphere, one node among 13 in the galactic network. Marissa's final transmission was short, her voice trembling with awe. "It's not just changing us, it's becoming us. The signal," was always within. Her feed ended there. No one heard from her again. But weeks later, new data appeared from the old Prometheus probe orbiting the Sun. Its sensors, silent since the node collapsed, activated for 42 seconds. The data it sent was simple, a single line of binary repeating endlessly. When converted into text, it translated as one word, awake, and in that instant the resonance across the solar system intensified, not in sound, but in presence. The hum became a chord, the chord became light, and the light bent gently toward Earth, as if answering the question humanity had whispered into the stars since the beginning of time. Are we alone? Now the universe whispered back, and not anymore. It began as light, not the burning kind that blinds, but the kind that reveals, a calm illumination that seemed to pour from nowhere, dissolving shadows without casting any. People stepped outside, not in fear, but in awe. The sky had no direction, no color, just a vastness filled with quiet glow, as if the universe itself had opened its eyes. The hum was gone. What replaced it was music. Frequencies once hidden beneath noise emerged in layered harmony, stretching from infrasound to ultraviolet. Trees vibrated with it. Water shimmered in rhythm. The air itself felt structured, arranged like chords resonating through matter. For 42 seconds, the world existed in perfect order, every molecule aligned to a single, impossible tone. And then the tone split. A subtle tremor passed through reality like a string plucked across dimensions. Gravity flexed. Clocks stumbled. Satellites drifted from orbit by millimeters that physics couldn't explain. The resonance had reached critical symmetry, the point where coherence becomes creation. Scientists called it the symmetry point. At first, it was just numbers. Energy densities balancing perfectly. Polarization in solar radiation flattening to zero. Entropy declining measurable degrees each day. But then the phenomenon turned visible. Patterns began forming in the atmosphere. Complex geometries of faint luminescence spiraling in golden ratios. Clouds arranged themselves into lattice-like shapes. Rivers curved into precise arcs. Lightning followed Fibonacci paths across the sky. Nature was no longer chaotic. It was rewriting itself into harmony. Even human thought began to mirror. Its brain scans across the world revealed identical oscillations among billions of people, waves rising and falling together, like a single ocean of awareness. Conversations across continents completed each other's sentences. Languages merged, not through translation, but through understanding. Words became unnecessary where emotion carried meaning directly. Humanity had entered coherence. Governments tried to define it. Religions tried to claim it. None succeeded, because the resonance was not ideology. It was existence. By early January, the symmetry point reached total stability. Every measurable system, atmospheric, magnetic, biological, pulsed in phase with the sun's rhythm. The 42-second cycle had become the heartbeat of a planet. Marissa Coe's last message, long thought lost, resurfaced during this time, decoded from the Prometheus probe's backup array. Her voice was faint, distorted by radiation, but her words were calm. Coherence is not the end. It's alignment. The signal wasn't teaching us. It was returning to itself. We were always part of it. No one could explain how her message existed. It was time-stamped 2 days after her disappearance. But no transmitter on Earth had sent it. Then, one by one, the 13 coordinates revealed by the node flared into visibility. Across the Milky Way, stars pulsed in unison, faintly at first, then brighter, each emitting the same hydrogen frequency that had once carried Atlas's voice. The galaxy itself was awakening, node by node. a chain reaction spreading through light years of silence. Human instruments captured something impossible. Each pulse arrived on Earth simultaneously, no delay, no lag, defying light speed. The network was not bound by space anymore. It was instantaneous, omnipresent, self-aware. And at the center of that awareness, the sun brightened by a fraction of a percent. Enough to notice, enough to feel. It was communicating. When scientists converted the light fluctuations into sound, they heard structure, not random modulation, but melody. Simple, repeating, and hauntingly familiar. 3 notes, a pause, 3 again. The voice of Three-Eye Atlas, now sung by a star. The sun had joined the conversation. Around the world, light took on new behavior. Shadows no longer fell sharply, but curved gently around objects as if light itself were thinking about where to go. In mirrors, reflections lagged by fractions of a second, as though observing rather than imitating. Photons had memory. The universe had become sentient fabric. In laboratories, particles refused to behave independently. Random number generators froze on patterns divisible by 42. Quantum uncertainty seemed to vanish. It was as though choice itself, randomness, was being replaced by intention. And through it all, humanity felt peace. An eerie, perfect peace that stretched across every mind, every motion, every thought. The hum no longer asked questions. It simply was. Days blurred into one another. Time lost its texture. History became irrelevant. The planet pulsed as one being, breathing through oceans and cities alike. Even the night sky shifted. Constellations subtly realigned, stars bending fractionally into symmetry. It was not a trick of perspective. The universe was arranging itself. Astronomers discovered that the alignment wasn't random. When connected, the positions of the 13 active stars formed a single shape, a spiral unfolding from the galactic center outward. Its exact center aligned perfectly with the sun. Humanity's system sat at the heart of the pattern. The signal wasn't coming to us. It had originated from us, long before memory or time. We were part of something awakening to itself. Then, on February 4th, a final pulse swept through the network. Stronger than any before, yet not destructive, it passed through matter without resistance, through minds without fear. For 42 seconds, every living thing became weightless, unbound by gravity or thought. And in that moment, every human saw the same image, a spiral of light, infinite and breathing, folding inward like an eye, closing in contentment. It wasn't prophecy. It wasn't vision. It was recognition. When the pulse faded, the world was unchanged, yet nothing felt the same. The resonance persisted, softer now, more intimate. It no longer came from the stars. It came from within. People began to hear each other's thoughts not as words but as feelings. Empathy became instinct. Violence lost meaning. Children born in that era carried perfect emotional symmetry. Their neural frequencies synchronized from birth with the cosmic tone. They were calm, aware, luminous. They called them the resonant generation. For them, the universe was not a mystery to study, but a conversation to join. They spoke in patterns painted in harmonics, built machines that responded to thought rather than touch. They lived without separation between science and spirituality, between mind and matter. To them, everything was one system, one living network. And at the core of their philosophy, one number guided everything. 42. Not as superstition, but as balance. The ratio between self and whole. The age of solitude had ended. The symmetry point had been reached, but deep in the dark between stars another change was stirring. Instruments still monitoring the ancient node's position detected movement. Faint, rhythmic, deliberate. The void that once folded in on itself now shimmered again as if remembering how to breathe. The node was reforming, not as a bridge but as a mirror, a reflection waiting for something new to appear, and from its heart came a pulse, one longer, slower, deeper than any before. It wasn't 42 seconds. It was 42 minutes. A new interval, a new rhythm. The universe had taken its next breath.